Basically, the Italians suddenly realized that all the artwork that was being made during the Middle Ages was garbage. And they finally came to their senses and got pretty into Greek and Roman stuff. We're talking art, philosophy, math, science, literature, music, everything. This was basically all started by the Medicis, which was a family of freaking ballers and high rollers in Florence, who used all their money to fund the rebirth of Greek and Roman fine art. Important Renaissance artists include Tintoretto, who painted Il Paradiso, Bosch, who painted the Garden of Earthly Delights, and Bruegel, who painted The Blind Leading the Blind. A little later, a German monk named Martin Luther had some serious beef with the Catholic Church. He wrote his beef down, called it his 95 Theses, and posted on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. People everywhere heard of this and wanted the church to change, and we call this time period the Reformation. Next came the Baroque era. There were actually a bunch of different movements going on at this time, like the Counter-Reformation in Italy, the Catholic Flemish movement in France, and the Dutch Protestant movement in the north. Some famous works of this era include the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, The Girl with the Pearl Earring by Vermeer, and The Philosopher Meditation by Rembrandt. Symphony orchestras also started to develop at this time. It was during this era that the Palace of Versailles was built by Louis XIV. Louis called himself the Sun King and basically claimed to be God-given.
I am the state.
It was built in the style of French classicism, and its hall of mirrors contained silver tables, tree pots, and candlesticks as tall as people. Rococo was a style of art and architecture that came about during the late Baroque era. Works from this era are known for being elaborate and over-the-top. Rococo painters started to show these over-the-top themes in their paintings. The most famous painting in this era was called The Swing by Fragonard. In the middle of the 16th century, people started to more seriously question things like the shape of the Earth and whether it was the center of the universe. Copernicus used Newton's 3 laws of motion to prove that the two-sphere theory was wrong, but he died before many people believed him. Luckily, Galileo came along and used his improved telescope to finally disprove the two-sphere theory and then founded modern physics. While all that was going on, people started to have more faith in the power of reason. Everyone started scrutinizing the authority of the church, the divine right of kings, and the privilege of the aristocracy. This movement is known as the Enlightenment. This questioning of authority was especially prominent in France, where the French Revolution was catalyzed in 1789 by the storming of the Bastille in search of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Another significant event of the French Revolution was the women's raid on Versailles.
Let them eat cake.
The revolution led to the death of thousands of French men and women and ended with Charlotte Corday killing Jean-Paul Marat while he was bathing. An important figure during this time was David, an artist who painted for both sides of the revolution. Right around this same time, neoclassicism was making its way into the visual arts. This ushered in the classical era and emphasized perfection in form. One notable individual of the classical era is Mozart, who mastered piano at the age of 3 and violin at the age of 5. The Pope later declared him a treasure for all time, and Mozart was still composing on his deathbed. At the latter end of the classical era, people became interested in nationalism, emotions, the natural world, and the occult, which led to the Romantic era. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is commonly known as the father of Romanticism. One prominent Romantic musician was Paganini. He was so good that rumor had it that he had struck a deal with the devil to sell his soul in exchange for his insane violin skills. One famous Romantic art piece was Goya's Saturn devouring his son. Realism came about as a reaction to Romanticism. Gustave Courbet is regarded as the father of realism.
Hey, paint an angel.
Show me an angel and I'll paint one.
Two prominent figures during this era were Karl Marx and Charles Darwin. Around 1880, Impressionism became a common theme in the arts. It focused on the idea of piecing everything together instead of the abstract idea of light. Rodin's most prolific art student, Camille, and Rodin actually had an affair. The only problem was, Rodin was married.
Rodin, leave your wife.
No,
But you don't even love her.
you're right. But that doesn't matter. And you're fired.
Van Gogh was an important post-impressionism artist, but he was considered an outcast and no one liked his paintings until he died. He painted Starry Nights right after checking himself into an asylum and then cut off his ear. In the late 19th century, the art scene changed once again. Art became a set of arbitrary rules that could be changed by the artists at will. It was a race to be different instead of an effort to look like classical works. Common themes included nationalism, universal truths, and meta-narratives. Picasso was the most well-known artist of this era. Picasso was so happy to finally have his art in a salon in Paris. But then he realized that Matisse's artwork was right next to him.
Hey, Picasso. Nice to see you here.
Grr, I hate that guy.
The most significant event of this era was World War I. This war led to significant changes in society that shaped the way countries interact to this day. World War I was catalyzed when Archduke Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated.